This conference will now be recorded.
And then just a couple of reminders. So I do record these webinars. For those of you joining live tonight, thank you, welcome. I think I noticed a number of people have returned from some of our prior webinars. For those of you that are joining for the first time, welcome and thank you. And I hope you find this a great conversation. And our subject tonight is resumes. I'm going to make a few comments about resumes as we get started, but before I do that, just a few logistics. And again, for many of you, I've had a chance to meet you, but for those of you that are joining for the first time, my name is Pam Schilling. I am the CEO and co-founder of Archer Career. I've spent about the last 10 years plus working in the career coaching space. A lot of my expertise is in job searches and career advancement, particularly with people who are pursuing highly selective positions or trying to make really challenging career changes. And prior to that, I got my MBA at Booth and then Chicago Booth, and spent the bulk of my career working in consulting and finance inside of a company, largely in the tech industry. And resumes is something that I spend a significant amount of my work today as a career coach. I spend a lot of time working on resumes. I also did my doctoral work on resume development. I'm going to talk a pinch about that tonight. I will save all of you from the nitty-gritty details of that, but I will highlight some of the insights that I gained from doing that work on top of my practical experience. So again, welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining. Our team is really pleased to be doing these webinars. It's now, I think we're about a month into it, month and a half. It's just been fantastic to get a chance to see the variety of people participating and also talk one-on-one with some folks through some of our other programs. So just a few, again, logistics. We're continuing to do these webinars. We'll be doing them, for the foreseeable future, particularly in this environment where they're open to anyone who wants to join us. The next couple of weeks, we're going to have, I think, some really interesting new topics. Next Monday, not Monday, because Monday is Memorial Day, but next Tuesday, I'm going to do a session on resilience. It's not exactly related to the job search, but I think in general, this is a stressful time. There's some things that I think are worth discussing. It'll be a fun session, I think. So please join for that if you're able. And then the following session, I'm going to talk specifically about job searching as a process and what that entails. So a little bit more of the end-to-end. And then the session following that, I'm super excited. I'm actually going to have a colleague of mine joining, and she has been in the job search process recently, just recently interviewed, as a matter of fact, and is going to speak about her experience and kind of how she prepared for that. And so not so much about me as a coach explaining what you all should be doing, but actually hearing from someone firsthand. So I think that will be a fun conversation. And then another offering that we have right now is a coaching session, a very nominal fee, and 100% of that fee is donated to a local business in the community where I live. And that local business happens to be a restaurant, and they are actually donating our donation to families in need, providing meals, that sort of thing. So we're very excited to be doing that, and feel very fortunate that we're in a position to both coach people who might not have an opportunity to have more of the traditional coaching, because sometimes it can be quite expensive. And just, I know I've been doing quite a lot of that, and it's been a really, really valuable and fulfilling experience. So if that's something that fits any of you, or you have someone in your set of friends, family, colleagues, please feel free to share. There's no qualifications. All right, enough of the kind of PR and logistics. So let me get into what I want to talk about tonight. So there are 4 things that predominantly I want to cover. I'm going to talk about what makes a resume stand out. I'm also going to speak to the 3 layers of building a great resume. First, what it takes to get started. I'm going to talk about format. There were a great number of questions in your registrations about the format of a resume. Then I'm going to talk about building the content of the resume itself around your experience and how to leverage some of your background and some of the best practices. And then also touch upon how do you really tailor your resume to the opportunity that you're pursuing or opportunities. We'll kind of walk through those layers. Certainly in an hour, hour and a half, we can't go into all the nitty gritty. So I'm gonna largely focus on some of the big rocks that I think are super important. I also have the questions that you all have submitted, and then I do want to leave plenty of time for you to be asking some questions. So keeping all that in mind, I may talk a little bit fast, but stop me, ask questions, please. So for introductory comments, first of all, and I'm actually going to quote someone in the question they asked in their registration. How do you know when you have the most effective resume? And what do you do when everyone has different advice? So the person who submitted that, I could not have said it better myself. Everyone has opinions about resumes. For all of you that are trying to work on your resume, I completely get how frustrating it is. I will tell you that this is known. I think there's probably some good reasons, and then I think there's some bad reasons. I will be trying to give you all what I think from my experience working with clients, from my own experience developing my resume, and then applying a little bit of the 80-20 of what I think works. And, in some ways, you guys have to learn to sift through this fog. But there is a lot of really good, consistent advice out there if you connect the dots a little bit, but it can be difficult. So I acknowledge that, and I am empathetic of the situation of anybody who's trying to work on a resume. So we know that. And of course, I could tell you that my perspective is the only one you should listen to, but that would be really ridiculous. I won't say that, but I will try to give you some of the things that I think that are the straight and narrow. The other thing, just my own perspectives about resumes. I've worked with a lot of people over the years as a coach. I've worked on a lot of different kinds of resumes. Dominantly my work is in the business arena, working with people pursuing roles in consulting and investment banking, other areas of finance, product management in the tech space, program management. I've worked with a couple of senior executives in the startup space that are trying to talk to venture capitalists. I've worked with high school teachers, college students, people in sales, all different types of varieties. I do have more of a business lens, but when I talk about some of the tailoring and how to develop content, that very much is oriented to the profession that you're in or the profession that you're seeking. And I think there's a lot of common themes regardless of what you're doing. But I do think you have to know the space that you're operating in. And I can tell you from my own experience, I have one foot in the business world as a business leader, and I run my own company, and I have a resume that I use, especially when I'm making proposals to clients. And then secondly, I am an academic, so I teach. I'm often having to present my CV, an academic CV, in certain circumstances. And so I've constantly trying to balance the different expectations and demands. So some of that perspective I'll bring for you as well, but you have to know the place that you sit in. And it's a little bit like, if you're going into the kitchen and you're gonna make some type of a dinner, you gotta have the right equipment. So you need to know what the meal is you're going to make and make sure that you have the right equipment to do so and the right ingredients. The third thing that I think is important for all of us to understand is that the resume is not going to get you a job. That is not the purpose of the resume. And therefore, you need to prepare the resume accordingly. What the resume is trying to do is open the door for you. It's a key. And when you put that key in the door, and you're going to see this metaphor in this conversation tonight, when you put the key in the door opens. But you still have to walk through the door. You still have to, kind of progress through the journey on the other side. And the resume is not going to be the thing that gets you the job. It is the preview of you as a candidate. Your intention, your objective is for most of you, to be offered an opportunity to interview. Perhaps you're using your resume for business development, and therefore you want to credential yourself in the eyes of your clients. Could be that you're an independent contractor or a consultant and you want to make sure not only do you get a project, but you get some type of rate that is fitting of the value of your work. And it also could be that you're working in a position and you're trying to advance within your own organization and you're trying to get that credibility. All right, but the decision, a lot of times, those outcome decisions are not being made exactly off of your resume. It's just the first step. So that's my third point. And then my fourth point, for those of you listening, some of you may be active job seekers where you've either lost a position and you're job seeking, you're in a position that maybe feels insecure and you are actively looking. You could be concerned about your position and therefore you're tooling yourself up. But the resume is something, no matter if you are an active job seeker or a passive job seeker, or even trying to advance within your own organization, you should keep your resume up to date, current, and using it as a part of your overall career management. So, philosophically, I think again about the resume as one of the tools in your career toolkit, and it gets deployed for different purposes. So sometimes it's applying to a job, sometimes it's, talking to a colleague in your organization about a new opportunity, a promotion, etc. And I think some of you had some really great questions about kind of an idea of a master inventory of your professional experience. And that's a really great concept to think about so that you can have all the information at your disposal. All right, with those 4 points then, I want to walk through a couple of things to get us started. So the first is really this kind of overarching question of, what is a good resume? What makes me stand out by way of my resume? How do I know if my resume is a good resume? And these are fair questions, and they are a bit at times challenging to answer. People, I think, fall into this camp of think into of I'm not really sure if my resume is going to get it done. Also confident, and in some cases it may be overconfidence. So I tend to focus on a few things. So if I'm answering this question, what is a good resume? A few things that I think are factors that you should keep in mind. So one, there's a little bit of the idea of beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So the only judge of whether your resume is good or stands out is the person who's reading it, your audience. That should be a hiring manager. Different hiring managers have different priorities. but you can do your best to try to figure that out depending on who you're sending your resume to. But what do I use then as my rubric, if you will, to judge if a resume is good? So the first thing that most people look at is just the quality of the presentation. I sent you guys a packet. It has a couple of simple resumes in it. And when somebody opens up a resume file, and I'll talk about the technology reading later, but when somebody opens up a PDF with a resume, does it look clean? Is it aligned? Are the fonts big enough? Are the margins big enough? Is there some white space? Does it look like someone with a great deal of conscientiousness put their resume together? And one of the reasons why this presentation is, I think, an important factor is that if I am going to hire you, if your resume is sloppy, there's probably a good chance that you do sloppy work. And if at the stage of, quote, us almost dating, if you're not putting your best foot forward, then I start to anticipate what it's going to be like when we're together on a more permanent basis, and that raises concerns. And also, as a hiring manager, I need ways to filter people out. So my first blush is going to be the presentation. Is it befitting of the caliber of position? And some of you might be students in college. Some of you might be mid-career professionals. Some of you might be career changers. Some of you might be executives. It's all the same. There's no hall pass. There's no exception, whatever career stage you're at. I really want your resume to just look like you actually proofread it and that you gave attention to the details. So that's the first blush. The second blush then is, can I tell in reading for, let's say, 35, 45, maybe 60 seconds that you have the core skills for the job that I'm hiring for? Or if there's not a specific job, if it's more exploratory, can I see that you have a good skill set, or that you have demonstrated some degree of motivation, progression in your background? And so then I'm reading some of the content. And if I'm hiring for a specific position, I'm going to be very picky about the titles of the jobs that you've had. I'm going to look at perhaps if you've been promoted. Are you rising in your career? Are you changing? Do you have some of the specific or technical skills necessary for my job? I'm going to look for that. That's kind of my second read. And then the third read, and I believe this is true for any type of professional, and I challenge all of you to tell me that I'm wrong, because I appreciate having new perspectives and learnings. But I think every professional, regardless of the type of role that you're in, the hiring organization wants to see that you're somebody that makes a difference. The individual I mentioned who was a high school teacher, we had significant conversations about outcomes, teaching outcomes. How do you know that in the classroom you are helping individuals learn? And the trend, by the way, if this isn't obvious, in education is to be exceptionally metric driven. And so having numbers and outcomes in the resume, even for a high school teacher, matters. If you are in public relations, this matters because your job is to uphold a brand image, to create awareness about a product or a business. That is quantifiable. If you are someone who is a graphic designer, there's probably a way to showcase your talent. I have a couple of friends that are photographers and videographers. They can talk about the measurable outcomes of the work that they do. And sometimes it's qualitative as well. But I think that's one of the factors that when you ask me, if I can pinpoint one thing that really makes a resume stand out, my answer would be, when I look at your resume, is it clear to me that you are somebody who, as a result of being in your jobs, you made a difference? So when you all are looking at your own resumes, ask yourself, does it look like you made a difference? And that difference can be defined based on the context of your job. I mean, I spend some time, I teach here in Chicago at DePaul. I teach a career management class to the undergrads. There may be some of the students of my class, past or present, listening. Hello, everyone. I remember maybe 2 quarters ago, I had an individual, and one of their part-time jobs was Jimmy John's. And I kept thinking about it, and it was kind of funny. We would talk about being freaky fast, and he said, yes, that is true. But one of the questions that we were talking about was, how does he maybe set himself apart from some of the other staff in his store? And he was able to talk about an experience in how he resolved a customer issue. Essentially, a wrong sandwich was delivered, and how he was able to speak to the customer on the phone, immediately resolve the problem, and I think the second sandwich was delivered faster than the first one. And that's the kind of thing that I mean, it's a very, very simple analogy, but it's very, very powerful, especially for someone super young. And then those of you that have many more years of experience, you can think about how those things are relevant for you. So always asking yourself, does my resume show in pockets that I've contributed to the organization, I've made a difference in my role, I've brought new ideas into the team, I've maybe stepped a little bit outside the boundary of my official job. Sometimes people contribute, they get involved in training. Sometimes it's mentoring other staff in the department. Sometimes it's initiating maybe a focus group for different employees, or starting kind of a internal community group within the company. All of those things show that you as a professional make a difference in your organization. So if you ask me that one question, I will say to you, what makes you stand out? Though that kind of layer, but ultimately it's this dimension of, do you make a difference? Now, as we go through these other building blocks that I want to talk about, and what I'm showing here on the screen, so when you're trying, especially to be hired or promoted, and hired, I can use liberally, whether it's as an employee or a contractor or a consultant, one of the key of fit. And fit is something that actually in the world of resumes is, believe it or not, extremely researched. And fit has several dimensions. And I think this is one of the reasons why, in fact, it's challenging to write a good resume, because you're trying to convey fit in multiple different ways in this 1 or 2 page document. So I'm not going to take you guys through a lecture on the theory of resume fit, but I just want to highlight a few of these things so that you can be thinking about it. So let's all put ourselves in the seat of the resume reader. Again, we'll put computers aside and the ATS systems for a few minutes. But a reader of a resume, I'm looking at your resume, again, your 1 or 2 page document, and I'm asking myself, do you fit the characteristics of our environment? Am I a big company? Am I a small company? How are we set up? All those questions. Then I'm asking, do you fit the job? Do you show that you have knowledge, skills, abilities for the job for future performance? If you are a college student or a graduate student, that could mean that your degree, that the courses that you've taken, your projects, your internships are representative of that. If you are an experienced professional and you're advancing in your career, there's got to be definite evidence of that. And then if you are someone who is a career changer, you're trying to move from one area to the other, is it clear that you have transferable relevant skills? So that's the job that I'm hiring for. And then I also might be trying to assess, by way of your resume, your alignment to the organization. And this has more to do with our culture. If we have a performance-driven, metric-driven culture, I would probably be looking for people who have a lot of metrics in their resume. If we have a mission-driven culture, then I would be looking for things in your resume that help address the fact that you care about mission. It could be by way of volunteer work. And then there's other aspects to culture, but there's some type of congruence that applies there. And then another level of assessment are kind of these group elements. So as humans, as people, you are going to probably go work in a team. Do I sense that you have the kind of background where you could fit into the team? And I am part of the group as the hiring manager. So that might also be a more specialized dimension of this group fit, which is, do you and I fit well together? And so again, as a hiring manager, I'm going to be making my judgments about, do I want someone who is like me in background, or do I want someone who's really different than me? And this has, lots of different factors. Your education drives some of this, the prior organizations that you've been a part of, what, work experiences you've had, all those things go into this. But these are, somewhat, back to my door and key analogy, it's almost as if there's several keyholes in the door and you're trying to unlock each one at a time. And you have to unlock them all to be able to get the door to open. And then, again, what makes some of this a little bit challenging is different hiring managers care differently about this. And I can even give you all a very personal example. One of my positions previous to my coaching work, I was the director of finance for a technology company here in Chicago. We were, say, 6 to 9 months away from doing an IPO, an initial public offering. I had a brand new finance team. I had one staff member working with me, and we were going to be pretty instrumental in some of the work that was being done to support the IPO. The individual on my team had background on Wall Street, so that was very helpful. We made a decision that we were going to hire 2 summer interns and MBA level interns to help us with some of our projects. Those 2 people, I made a decision to hire one person who also had Wall Street experience because I knew that that person would work under the conditions that we were in very effectively. The other person was a total not fit. That person came from advertising. Their finance acumen was developing as an MBA student. If I had been in a different position, if I could only hire one of those interns, I might not have been able to hire the person who had the advertising background because of the priorities. But a year later, when we had finished the IPO and we were doing different types of things, then I might have, if I only could hire one, I might have been able to hire the person with that advertising background and help train them a bit more. So I tell you all this because sometimes the circumstances of hiring are very conditional to the moment. And I think that that's relevant for the situation that we are presently in, because this is an unusual time economically, the business environment, the opportunity for hiring. But yet there are hiring managers out there who like people who have motivation, who have broad skills versus special skills. And then, you may be saying to yourself, well, how do I figure that out when I'm writing my resume? That's kind of hard. We'll come back to that. But these are some of the things that, again, you're trying to accomplish big picture with your resume. So with some of that, how do I stand out? What's important at a macro level? Let me take you through some of these pieces. And there were, I think if I had to go through my questions from all of you, the how many pages and how should the resume be formatted was probably the top question. So one, thank you for that. And two, it is fascinating to me that this is such a hot topic. And I think it's also because it's kind of the place where you get all of this differing advice. And I think I will try to give you all some criteria that I use and how I approach this. So in any given year, I may work on 50, 75 resumes with rigor, like where I'm really in the weeds on the resume. And in my work, and again, it's expansive to different types of professionals, different years of experience, career changer, career advancer, all those different scenarios. I don't have a one size fits all approach. Every single person I work with on a resume, we sit down and we ask a few questions. And I run through a set of factors. So I'll explain those to you guys. So number one, I do look at the stage of your career. My rule of thumb is anybody with 10 years or less experience, and 10 is not a magic number, but we'll use it. Anybody with 10 years or less of experience post-undergrad, post your bachelor's degree, or post high school, depending on where you are in your further education, always it's a one-page resume, because to do resumes well with that years of experience, you will not do a two-page resume successfully. I also often do a one-page resume for senior executives. I've done one-page resumes for CEOs. I have done one-page resumes for startup founders. I've done one-page resumes for people with 25, 30 years of experience. And I personally have a one-page resume that I use for my consulting work. There are some reasons for that. Part of it is because there is a dilution of old experience because it's no longer relevant. There's an ability then to be a little bit more creative around the presentation of some of the content. And many times, especially senior people, the hiring decision is being based on what you've done in the last 2 to 5 years. And then a lot of times also there is a referral process, there's something else going on that that a lot of that earlier experience is just well understood. But it just shows you the bookends of experience that can be fit into a one-page resume. Where there is debate when I'm thinking about a resume format is someone with 12, 14, 16 years of experience who perhaps has enough work experience to fit into a two-page resume. But the question is, is it worth it? Because plenty of people are reading resumes on mobile phones. Plenty of people have been reading them on laptops. And so the more pop you can get on one page, the better. Now, there's also some data out there that says hiring managers like two-page resumes. It's more likely to get you the job. And I do think that there's some truth to that. I work with a lot of people that are experienced professionals. They're going into consulting jobs. They're going into expert positions. They've done a lot of project work, and having 2 pages can be beneficial because you really get to say a bit more about your work. So in my work, and what I would say to all of you is, it's not exactly hard and fast, but there is definitely benefit to trying to at least have one version of your resume that's a one page. If you're going to do 2 pages, the general rule of thumb is it's got to be two full pages. So 1.5 pages, it kind of looks like you forgot some stuff on the second page. So you have to really think about how you're going to write. You want to space things out. You don't want to cram stuff together, because then it sort of violates my first rule about the presentation. The judgment there, I think, is what I do in my process is I try to develop a one page, and if it's just not possible, if I am diluting very important content, then I move to 2 pages. But then, there's a second hard job, which is, again, trying to fill it in for 2 full pages. My other commentary about this topic of 1 page, 2 page, many pages, you again need to think about your audience. So my academic CV, I think, is like 10 or 12 pages. And in the academic environment, that is super appropriate. In the business world that I operate in, it is not good to have more than a 2-page resume. It will actually hurt you because people will fear that you do not know how to speak briefly. So think about your audience. If you are in the creative arts, if you are looking at startups, if you're looking at nonprofit organizations, if you're looking at family businesses, organizations that maybe are not so corporate, then I think sometimes having a resume format that is fitting of your audience is beneficial. So when I look at academic institutions, because I do some programs for universities, I don't send them my 10-page CV, but I have a resume version that's like a 2-page resume CV hybrid, because it's something that seems to appeal to the half academic, half business person. So you guys are not going to have 13 resume versions like I do. I by no means say that. But what I think works best is to create this master version, which is befitting the lane that you're in. And what each of you should think about is, what is the lane that you're in? If you are in a traditional corporate environment, you're probably going to have a traditional formatted resume. If you're more on the early career side, it's going to be 1 page. If you're on a later career side, you may slip to 2 pages. If you're in the tech space, if you're in the creative arts, if you're in education, some of these other fields that are not so quote corporate, you might have a slightly different format. And it might be 1 page or 2, depending again on your experience. So the best way to judge this is to get the resumes of people in your field, find out what makes sense, and then also test market what you're thinking about doing, okay? But if you ask me, if you came and we were working together, I would, for a lot of purposes, I'll try to do a 1 page resume. I just did one the other day for somebody with 14-ish, 15 years of experience. I think I did another one recently with 20 years of experience. And a lot of it is because, especially if you've changed a little bit your career path, some of those early experiences don't matter as much. So there's a couple questions, and someone's put up a question in the chat that I'm going to kind of bring together in the format area. So another question that came through with some of the registrations was, what about a professional summary? That was one question. Another, and this is the one that's in the chat, about a functional resume. Both excellent questions. So I'll address them with a similar opening comment. There are readers of resumes who do not like professional summaries, and they do not like functional resumes. I think probably in my circle, probably 50% of people don't like professional summaries. And the reason that people don't like it is because they are often poorly written. They usually have a bunch of marshmallow fluff in them. I am a high performing individual who gets results, who's a team player and an excellent collaborator. And if yours is written that way, I apologize. I'm not trying to be offensive or quip, but the problem is that doesn't tell me anything about you. So that's the reason why a lot of hiring managers don't like those professional summaries. What is better is to have facts and hard skills in your summary. I am someone with X years of experience. I have spent my time in these industries. I have worked in these functional areas. I have a particular strength in global businesses, complex business operations, under-resourced nonprofit organizations, like something very factual and descriptive that quite honestly lines up to some of these things in the fit. So rather than using kind of some of these cliches and phrases, it's a bit more fact driven. And if you can do that type of professional summary, then I think that works. And I think you can do it on a 1 page. I think you can do it on a 2 page. The other thing that works for some people in a professional summary is to have results. So I have done this for people in sales. I've done it for senior executives. It's very quantitative. I've also done it for the individual I mentioned who was a teacher, to be able to say, here are the outcomes that I achieved. Here are the results. I've had 16 quarters of consistent double-digit growth in my accounts. Last year I sustained our operating margins while increasing revenue 3%. I mean, these are, again, very business-oriented descriptions, but those type of results kind of sometimes popping at the top of the page really help people know that you are somebody, again, who can get things done. And I think in certain positions, they are beneficial. So professional summary, if you make it very skills-based, descriptive of competencies, aligned to the type of organizations you've worked in, expertise that you have, I really like that. And I think that hiring managers do too. And I think it also sets the tone of the focus of your resume. So then the second question about the functional resume, I think this is one where I find a bit more clarity. And, Gwen, you've asked that question. I can tell you that most of the people that I know, they do not like functional resumes. I think the rationale for it is they feel like you're trying to be something that you're not, or that you're trying to cover something up, like a gap, which, by the way, a gap is not typically a problem. But again, and this could just be the circle of people that I know that are hiring managers and in HR, they're like, just be direct, just be chronological. If you have a gap in your resume, join the club. You can talk about things in your networking, you could talk about things in your cover letter. But I think what's really hard with a functional resume is it doesn't show me the story of your career. It's like these puzzle pieces that may not be put together. So in some ways, what I try to do in my work is I try to use the chronological and then use like a professional summary to link the puzzle pieces together. The other thing that sometimes you can do is use a cover letter to link those puzzle pieces together, and that can be written with a functional orientation. So this is kind of a hard topic, but I do think the trend with resumes today has really moved away from functional. My one probably area where I do sometimes move into the area of functional. I have this resume that it's like a hybrid. The one page is chronological and the second page is almost like an appendix, and it's written with a functional orientation. I use that often for people going into consulting, going into executive positions, or also career changers, because it does allow somebody to see your career history, but also see the particular skills that you bring to the table. So, there are, again, kind of these hybrids when it comes to the format. Okay. So those are some thoughts, and again, as we're talking about this, you all can ask a few follow-up questions. So let me move on then to the second layer of the resume, the content. What I think a lot about are the bullets on the page. And when I read a resume, when I'm developing resumes, I have two references that come together. So one reference is a job description. And I have an example here. I just pulled in one, product management. So I study and analyze, and I have my clients do it. I'm not always doing it myself, but I really like to analyze the position that you're targeting, right? So this, by the way, moves beyond kind of your question, maybe what role do I target? We're beyond that stage. You've already decided. But job descriptions, especially these days, they're so accessible. And a lot of times what I like to do is take the job description, I'll print it out, and I just analyze it. And I'm trying to really understand what the skills are that the organization is looking for. Now, this is not perfect. Sometimes there's things behind the scenes, but I know that for this job in product management, there's something about a vision, there's something about a product strategy, there's something about roadmaps, there's something about business needs and product planning cycle, et cetera, right? So all of this information in a job description, it's like golden nuggets for the resume. Because now when I write the resume, if you're writing your own resume, this is your alignment guide. This is what you're aiming for. And when you phrase things, you can use the same terminology. And so if you're, as an example, if you're someone who's maybe a more junior product manager and you're trying to get a promotion to a director, that's a more senior level, look at director job postings and look across multiple postings, but pull out the language that they're using and then place that language in your resume. If you're trying to make a career change, this is also incredibly important research so that you understand the lexicon of the positions that you're going to. So that's one side of the alignment. The other side of the alignment then, and I just pulled an individual's profile as an example, is you and your experience and the inventory of all of your work and thinking about your projects. And I like to think at the project level because when you're writing the content of the resume, you don't want to just generically describe. So back to my example from this posting on LinkedIn, what I wouldn't want to do in my resume is say, I create visions, I create product strategies, I've created roadmaps. Like I wouldn't want to be that generic. What I want to do is say, I created a vision for a new program that might touch 200 participants within our organization. Maybe you are creating a training program. And I would talk specifically about that program. So I'm trying to draw from the actual work that you've done and you've delivered, and then to wrap this around the language that's being used for the job descriptions that you're going to. And the more that your resume can line up to the comprehensive set of things across these job descriptions and also use the same language, the better off that you're going to be. And then if you find that there are things that don't align, that shows you where some of the gaps are between you and some of the criteria for hiring. So this is how we get at job fit. And a lot of times when I'm doing this work, and I gave all of you a example of a document that I use in the packet that I sent out. And again, if you didn't happen to pull that up before our webinar, I will post it on the website. But a lot of times this is what I'll do with someone. And sometimes we talk through it, sometimes we work it on paper, but we'll try to think about a particular project. And then one of the things that I try to do is I try to ask if there was a result. And that way we can think about that right from the start, because for many people, that's one of the harder things to think about in the context of the resume. And then I try to think about the business problem or, within the context of your experience. If you're a research scientist, What are some of the research questions that you're trying to answer? Why are those challenging or important in your field? If you were a teacher, what are some of the student objectives that you're trying to achieve, et cetera, et cetera. And then this next section where you're asking yourself, what did I do on this particular project or this particular assignment? The great thing about that is you're trying to use those job postings to help guide you in your thinking. So, if it's something really technical where you had to write SQL code or, put something in a database and do data visualization, or write a roadmap or write a lesson plan or write a legal brief, whatever it might be. If that's in the type of positions that you're looking for, then you're trying to kind of run through this particular project that you worked on and see what you actually did. So you're going back in your memory, kind of jot some of those notes down. Ask yourself if it was important, because sometimes we put stuff in our resume that was kind of minor, that we thought about it for 5 minutes. That isn't great for a resume, it doesn't make for good content. And then after thinking about this whole project, then you can think about, what are the skills that I want to emphasize? What do I think is going to be really important to highlight on my resume? And then you can start to write the bullet, and there's some verb choices that help because we like action verbs in our resume. And then you stitch that resume bullet together. So the content of those resume bullets, to me, is super crucial. And I'll give you guys an example. I will see this many times in a resume. It will say, I delivered a presentation to an executive audience, or I mentored a group of new hires. These are just things that kind of randomly popped into my head. Those things have merit, but I don't know what to do with them if I'm the reader of a resume. So if you gave a presentation, were you invited to do it? Were you selected to do it? Were you speaking to 5 people or 500 people? Did you get any feedback after the presentation where somebody said that presentation was really insightful? So even something fairly straightforward, rather than just saying, I gave a presentation about resumes, I could say, I gave a presentation to an audience of 51 participants talking about resumes. After the fact, I had X number of people follow up for individual coaching appointments, which generated X revenue, because that's in my work, right? For you guys, it might be different. But the point is, always ask yourself, why did this matter? What did I do? How do I give it more robustness? That is what will make your resume content even better. So if it sounds generic, if it sounds just like the job description, what makes it better is it's not good enough. It's you talking about work. You explain again that you did that work really well. That, by the way, is, to me, one of the hardest parts of doing resumes. That's one of the ways that I find them personally very interesting, and why I'm a coach. Some of you are saying, I don't think any of this is interesting. That might be why you are in your profession and I am a career coach. So that is okay. All right. But if I can kind of summarize this part of the conversation, if you guys do your homework, which is really studying job descriptions, and you are analytic, like I actually will take job descriptions and I will type them into a spreadsheet and I kind of extract all the junk. Now, mind you, I have a finance background and I love spreadsheets, so that works very well for me, but it's that kind of discipline, that kind of rigor that just like amps your resume up. And then you say to yourself, okay, how do I talk about my experience? The best alignment possible. Okay. And then, a few of you have been asking about summary of skills in your resume. How do you work with the ATS systems, the automated reads of your resume, the applicant tracking systems? This is how you do it. So I don't know if Adobe, this just happens to be Adobe. I have no stock in Adobe. I just happen to pick it. I don't know if you submit your resume to them and their system is reading it, but odds are if in your resume bullet you talk about vision and you talk about product strategy and you talk about roadmaps and you talk about and working cross-functionally with engineering teams and you use some of those words, the chances that you're gonna pop out as a positive with an applicant tracking system are better than if you don't use those words. And I'll insert one little point here. Huge percentage of jobs are filled by referrals, so it's really hard to get through those applicant tracking systems anyway. They tend to be tailored more towards jobs that have more transactional skills. We have to be aware of them because they're a part of the environment today, but it's just in general a lower probability outcome as a job seeker. So just always keep that in mind. But I don't think you have to do anything magical in your resume. Just use the language of the position requirements as you describe your work. Okay, so the last couple things I just want to talk about, and then we will move to some Q&A, is the last mile of the resume, if you will. All right, so the format and then your content. That is going to get you 75, 80, 85% of the way there. If you find that you are looking at a couple of different areas, as an example, I've worked with people that are looking at internal finance roles like FP&A, financial planning and analysis, and then maybe they're looking at corporate development. There are some similarities, but there are definitely differences, right? Somebody in that scenario might need to have two resumes. I work with people that pursue consulting roles and product management roles. Those resumes have similarities, but differences. So until we get to this stage right here that I'm going to talk about, kind of the 301 level, what you want to do is try to have one master resume that you really hone in on, your primary focus. And then you're going to have a second master if you have that second focus. I find that if you have more than two masters, it could be that you have two masters that are guiding you, that you have way too many avenues that you're pursuing in your job search. And then each avenue gets less attention, it's less good, it's way diluted. So the more focused you are, the better, which means you really only need two, at the most, maybe three master resumes. So keep that in mind. So this third stage, resume 301, tailoring specifically, now you are tailoring to a job. So this is not only role specific, but it might be company specific. And so the key that you're putting in the door is very tight. And it's wrapped around not only, a teaching position, a finance position, a product position, but it's for a particular company. And so this is where your homework is to do some research about that organization. Ideally, you've done some networking. Ideally, you've read some things online and you have a deeper understanding of what they're looking for. If you haven't been able to network with them, then ideally you've looked at some of their professionals on LinkedIn to kind of get an understanding of some of these things that I talked about previously. How big is the company? What are the job skills? That's in the posting. What are some of their organizational values? If you look at people on LinkedIn, can you get a sense of, their profiles and their personalities? Can you map to any of that? Right? So it's helpful sometimes to do some of that research so that when you get to the point of submitting a resume, you can really tailor your resume to a job. And I was doing some research just on marketing jobs. And when you look at certain, entry level, mid level marketing jobs, there's some really specific things that you have to have in your background, whether it's education or experience. If you look at the way that organizations describe themselves in the job posting, on their website, on their career pages, they'll use words like innovative, decisive, we work collaboratively. We want people to feel autonomous, right? They say some of this stuff. So you can replicate some of those words in your resume. And then, and this is the area where I did my research for my dissertation, I actually probed on one specific aspect of the organization and the environment, which is their organizational life stage. By that, I mean some companies are in a startup phase, they're small, they might have 5 people, they may not have a product yet. Other companies are really mature. These are big established organizations that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years. And then there's some organizations that are in a turnaround phase. They're struggling, they're shrinking, their market size is shrinking. These are different organizational life stages. And if you can tailor your content and your style of resume to where that organization is, you increase the assessment of your hireability, right? So that's an important distinction, right? At the resume stage, you want people to view you as hireable. And so the more that you tailor, the better. And as an example, if you all have the packet I sent out in front of you, the 2 resumes that I have in here, these are actually the resumes I used for my doctoral research. And one of them, the first one, where the candidate worked for the company called Play, this is a startup resume. It's somebody who's worked in startup companies, small companies. The second resume is who's the person who worked for Hasbro. Hasbro is a really big, mature toy company. So if I'm an employer and I'm a peer of Hasbro, maybe I'm Mattel, depending on what I care about, I might prefer the person they better understand who used to work for Hasbro, because how to navigate If, on the other hand, a mature bureaucratic organization, and maybe worked for a startup, maybe I prefer the person who play, who also has dealt in startup discussion, and you take. So the way I actually this and one and tried to model in the resumes the language of the job postings. So that's a little bit of how the tailoring can happen, is by looking at the job postings and then taking your background and using certain language to match the environment of the organization. Okay. This, by the way, is not, it's just, again, not the easiest thing to do. But the more aligned you are to the job that you're applying to, the better off you're going to be. All right. How's the audio? I know there were a couple comments. Does it sound okay now? Excellent. Thank you. All right. So we have a few, I want to leave some time for you guys to ask questions kind of live. I have a few more questions that were submitted. I'll save those. I'm not exactly giving you guys a recipe for, if you do these 3 things, this will make your resume better. But what I am suggesting to you is, number 1, understand and do the research of what it is that you're trying to use your resume for, who you're applying to. Use the job postings to help you shape the content of your resume. And then, think about really how do you power pack your resume. And I think there was one question, and I'll pause after I answer this, but one question that was submitted, someone asked, what is the single thing that I see that's kind of the biggest gap in resumes? If I have to answer only one thing, I think it would be having numerical results in your resume. That is probably the one thing that I think, especially in the business environment of 2020 in general, the modern business environment of today, but also especially in a down economy, not having numbers in your resume to quantify your results can really hold you back. So, questions from all of you. And I have a few more things I can address by way of the questions that were already submitted. So feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to ask live, go ahead and take yourself off mute and do so. All right, wow. A few thinking questions are coming in. Let me look at some of my list. So one question about organizing, I encourage you guys, if you can, I mean, I know this stuff takes time, but academic CV that's just pages and pages, thing like an academic, organize it, work projects, put labels on. If you've ever given presentations, if you've given talks, if you've done volunteer work, consider all of that. Put that in like a master document. You could put it in a Word document, a PowerPoint document. You can also put it into an Excel spreadsheet. That's a great thing to do. If you're someone who's a career changer, I do think really being thoughtful about your transferable skills and making that as clear as possible. Talking about someone who, um, like you, has made a similar career change and learning about those people and what they did in their resume, talking about how you've delivered results and showing your motivation. So being a results deliverer in one environment, odds are you're going to do it again. So that's important. There's a question here about, I kind of enjoy this question and I'm not 100% sure how to answer it, but I'll answer it this way. The question is, how do you make your resume exciting? One might say, how exciting can a resume be? But I will say this, the resume is a representation of your professional personality. So I like a lot of facts in a resume, but I also like to see the kind of human that you are. And that means you have to be you and you have to be very comfortable speaking about you in your resume. So in one version of my resume, I have things like the fact that I'm on the PTO at my kid's school. I have done certain types of volunteer work. I worked at one point with a volunteer organization that supported people who had come out of prison. I have worked with people who have talked about their missions on their resume. So because of a certain religious background, they work with social justice causes. I've talked with people who've done and put things on their resume that are incredibly fun. Travel, written books, write blogs, enjoy cooking, participate in a native folk dance, all of those things, and there's so many more. Athletics, winning chess competitions. I mean, you guys can name the gamut of it. Many of those things in certain circumstances can be helpful. I think some of them might be more relevant coming out of a student environment, but even as a professional, having certain connections, and this again depends on your audience. I mean, there's a lot of companies that want you to be a good corporate citizen who's going to represent their organization in a lot of different facets. So researching that and including that can be valuable. And the final thing I think you want to remember about your resume is if you're not excited about it, other people aren't going to be either. So when you guys finish this next version of your resume, you should look at it and you should be able to say to yourself, man, this is a good person. I want to hire this person. I know this person has great potential. I know they have great energy. I think they'd be fun to work with. Like you should ask yourself those questions. Is that coming through on your resume? So some of this then comes through the content that you provide. And Amaya's asked a question about, the company background and and this can extrapolate to other information. If you all work for companies and it's not an organization that the name is well known, one of the companies I worked for was Sprint. Most people know Sprint. You may have good things or bad things that you think about them, what have you, but I never really had to explain the company. You may work for a company that people have not heard of. And so adding that little bit of detail, and it could be a super exciting company that nobody's ever heard of. So having that detail and spacing out your resume in a way could be very helpful. I apply the same thing. It could be that you have a job title that's really weird. Like at some point, I had a job title that was Project Manager 1. Well, I worked in finance and I worked on a joint venture between my company and two international telephone companies. The job was much more interesting than my title. So I had a short description right above my first bullet, and I think that that helped. Another question has come up. So, a photograph on your resume. Thank you for asking that question. So, this is geographically dependent. So, in the United States, and this is kind of a weird thing as a difference between a resume and LinkedIn. In resumes in the US, by way of laws that relate to diversity, inclusion, and discrimination, you are not allowed to have a photo on your resume. Now, if you're working for a organization, that maybe doesn't abide by some of those things, they may allow that, but generally, that is not normative practice in the US, and it can actually be problematic. It is true that you guys have photos, and most of us have photos on LinkedIn. So in some ways, it's kind of stupid that we have these rules about resumes, but there is a difference between the resume and the LinkedIn profile. So the LinkedIn profile is social media. That's your choice. It is also true that you can apply to positions through LinkedIn, and therefore your photograph can be seen. Just recognize that there is a difference between these two tools, job search tools. So no photo in resume, photo on LinkedIn. Although photo on LinkedIn is certainly optional, but it is more typical to have it. When you get into other countries, the photograph is more common and expected depending on the country and depending on their hiring practices. So places in Europe, China, things like that do include photographs. They use more of a CV, not an academic CV, a professional CV, but typically a photograph is included. So, keeping some of that in mind. It is kind of a weird thing. Until LinkedIn came about, we had gotten rid of the photo in hiring practices. But now, because many positions you can just apply through LinkedIn, it's somewhat there, even though it's not supposed to be there. So take that for what it's worth. A few more questions. I'm going back to the list of questions that were submitted. There's a really good one about kind of side hustles and part-time jobs, consulting positions that are sort of in addition. I think you have some choices if those are relevant to you. One is include them as professional experience and just put them below your current role. Talk about them as advisory, talk about them as consulting. I think you have to decide how prominent you want them to be in your resume. The other place to include them is in an additional section. And, generally most of the resumes I worked on, I have 3 to 4 sections. If there's a professional summary, that's one. Experience is the second. Education is the third. Fourth is the additional. I typically don't have more sections. The exception for that is when I'm working with individuals in research programs, science, where they do have publications and presentations, we might have an additional section. But certainly you have some options with, additional work that you're doing, side hustles. So keeping that in mind, just a few tactics if you're question working remotely, I think you can use how you want to relocate it, or you want
when with where you're
having some trouble with the sound.
out.
Let's see if I can. All right, I apologize, guys, for the audio. The webinar systems must be going crazy. So hopefully it will be okay. Great, thank you. Thanks, guys, for letting me know that. I do apologize. So anyway, don't worry about those things. Those are not the kind of factors that are going to really be a major big deal. I think what's relevant right now is some jobs are being posted as remote. I've seen this quite a lot. I think also certain jobs, they will not consider candidates who have to relocate. And other jobs don't really care about relocation. So think about some of those factors when you're including some type of city location. And if you're working remotely, then typically you're either going to put your HQ of your office or you're going to put your home location. Most of the time you can, if you have space on your resume, you can actually put both. Another question, should most of the emphasis be on your most recent work? My answer to that is yes. For the most part, a read of a resume is looking at the last present to about 5 years back, and it just depends a little bit on what your career history looks like. If you've been in the same functional area for several years, that's going to be, probably the timeline. Sometimes it's the last 2 years, and again, it just depends a little bit on the nature of your position. But I know what I do with a lot of the resumes is those early career experiences, we will put limited content, especially if they were unrelated to what you're doing today. So always keep that in mind, that more recent work is the most relevant. And then if you are a career changer, someone who's trying to move into a new area, you might create a little more balance then to try to bring out some of the skills from each of the positions which are relevant. So there's a difference between somebody advancing versus someone trying to move into a different field. And then it also depends on how much of a movement it is. So trying to think about some of those facets relates to you a little bit uniquely. And I've had a few questions because I think some people who know my work know I do a lot of work with people looking at consulting roles. Consulting roles like the body of work in your resume, but they are also probably going to look at the most recent 2 to 5 years, especially because they look at career progression, they look at complexity, they look at scope. And one of the final questions that I'll answer, and then I'll do a little bit of wrap up here. One of the, I think, good questions that I was thinking about was, look, if I'm trying to go from job A to job B, and that's a bit of a change, and maybe my skills are more technical and I'm trying to broaden those types of things. Something I encourage you all to think about when developing your resume is always think about the problems that you solve or the challenges that you've addressed in your work. I mean, whether you're an attorney, whether you're in HR, whether you're a teacher again, whether you're an artist, with every person out there, people in healthcare, there is something that we are accomplishing. There's a purpose for our work. And if you focus on that and you describe that, and then you use some of the skills that are in the new field, function, job, industry that you're trying to go to,
you can bridge that gap ever more. Okay. So I'm going to make a couple of closing comments, and then I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes and answer other questions even more individually. But I offer, you all a couple of these summary thoughts. So research and analysis is very powerful. Looking at the marketplace, which is job postings and networking, looking at your own experience and analyzing it. Those are very, very powerful. And then do the homework and put your resume together, and then test your resume. In my work, and I do it with friends of mine, I don't compensate people. I will say, hey, I'm working with a client. I would love to have you as a hiring manager look at this resume. People are very generous with their time, and they're not going to give you a play-by-play detailed read, but people will look at your resume. And so as you're working on it, if you're trying to get feedback, go to your colleagues, go to people that you've spoken to. If you're affiliated with a university, go to their career office, whether you're a student or an alumni, and see if people will look at your resume. And then you have to kind of sift through the diversity of comments. But the one final test is to really go out to hiring managers. So people who hire for the kind of position that you're looking at. Get that feedback. And then ask yourself, is this impressive? Does this convey that I'm somebody who makes an impact on the organization? Is it concise? Is it buttoned up, etc.?
And as a kind of a final closing comment for resources and references, there's so many of them out there. I'm not going to bog you guys down with tons of them, but if you do want to just, again, look at some of the materials that I have, on our website, there's an insight section. This is where all of our webinars are being posted, by the way. If you scroll down to the bottom and over to the bottom right, there's a section on resumes. And if you click on that, I've got a couple of other webinars I've done. And then there's some additional resources, not to make you click too much, but you can go into that area. And then I have, if you just scroll down a bit, I have a few more of the materials that I use. I have some samples. I'm always updating these. And please use those at your leisure. So I'm going to wrap things up for tonight. Again, thank you all for listening and joining. And I wish you the best. Have a really nice rest of the week. Have a great holiday weekend for those of you that are part of, if anyone's international, that may not be relevant, but most of you will be here in the US, I think. And good luck working on your resumes. All right, thanks everybody. So I'm gonna answer a couple of the questions that were presented. So there was a follow-up question about side gigs, and specifically, how do I deal with a gap? Is it okay to put volunteer work or consulting? So I think I'll answer it this way. Yes, it is appropriate to have a side hustle as a gap filler. It is also okay to do volunteer work as a gap filler. And don't worry. Plenty of people have really good reasons. Some people are job searching for periods of time. It's sometimes hard to look for a job. There are going to be people that don't like that, and you can't control that. So put the best information possible. If it gives you any comfort, I mean, one of my close friends, when I first met this individual, they had kind of reached out to me for a networking conversation. They were a stay-at-home parent at the time, and we were talking about ways to kind of get back and enter the workforce. And that person did that, and eventually that person moved in to be the CEO of a very nice company here in Chicago. So I think some of it's just how you're able to deal with that and talk about it. But package all of your assets the best way that you can, but don't be afraid of a gap that might happen to exist in your resume. I hope that kind of fills in a little bit more around that question, Cliff. Any other questions from the resume angle, or in general, other questions? All right. Okay, everyone. Well, if that's a wrap, thanks again. Have a great evening. All the best. Bye.